They laughed when they fired him. Laughed like he was a joke, a relic. But 3 days later, the police were in the office. He didn't shout, didn't plead, didn't even flinch. He just packed his things and walked away. But behind his silence was a plan. A plan forged in late nights, quiet loyalty, and years of being overlooked. They thought they were cutting dead weight. What they really did was pull the last thread holding the company together. This is not a story of revenge. It's a story of value, of resilience, of what happens when a man who built quietly finally speaks through action. You're about to witness the slow unraveling of greed and the rise of dignity. Stay with me. For more original stories, subscribe to Audio Tales. Now let's begin this one. They didn't even make eye contact when they said it, just a clipped line, like clearing a throat. Clear out your desk by the end of the day. I remember the way the fluorescent light flickered above the HR glass, that tired hum like a dying insect. It had been flickering for 3 years. I used to submit work orders to facilities, but no one followed through anymore. I stopped trying. That hum stayed with me long after I walked out. My name is Daniel Ward. I was the Director of Systems Architecture for Norex Dynamics, 22 years of service. Joined when we were 3 guys in a server rack in a rented WeWork basement. I designed the original data mesh before data mesh was a buzzword. Before Gartner started peddling it to CFOs in suits who never wrote a single line of code. When we scaled to Series C, it was my schema that kept us upright. The devs called it the spine. It wasn't flashy, just stable, quietly dependable, like me. Maybe that was the problem. I didn't sell myself like the new ones did. Didn't throw words like disruption or velocity into every sentence. I built what worked, kept it clean, watched the system hum. They didn't notice when I stopped being invited to the strategy meetings. Or maybe they did. Maybe that was the point. You can feel it when the room forgets you. When your chair goes unacknowledged, your name left off the calendar invites. No one says it outright. That's not how these things happen. It's always quiet. A certain tone in the emails. A pause too long when you offer a solution. The way their eyes flick past you in the hallway. Still, I stayed late. I cleaned up after their rushed deployments. I patched the holes no one saw. I kept the damn lights on. I told myself it was loyalty. But deep down, it was inertia. A belief that if I just kept showing up, they'd remember who I was. Then came Friday. It was raining, but not in any dramatic way. Just a steady, irritating mist that clung to your skin. I remember watching droplets slide down the window pane as I waited in the glass conference box. The VP of Ops, Marla, she didn't meet my eyes. She kept clicking her pen. Legal was on mute over Zoom. They read their script like I wasn't a human being. Restructuring, they said. Strategic shift, they said. No cause, they clarified, almost helpfully, as if that made it less of a blade. I didn't say anything. Not then. Not during the awkward silence that followed. Not when Marla offered me a generic printout with bullet points and a LinkedIn QR code for transition support. Not when I walked back to my desk and found that someone had already removed my network credentials. It was 3:47 p.m. when I slid my ID badge into the cardboard box they gave me. I remember because the clock on the wall was wrong by 3 minutes. Another maintenance ticket no one had answered. I stared at it for a moment. Then I opened the drawer, took out the single-framed photo I kept. My son at age 9, holding a soldering iron with a grin so wide it made his ears stick out, and placed it gently on top. No one spoke to me on my way out, except Sharon from payroll. She nodded, eyes wet, but said nothing. That was enough. When the elevator doors closed behind me, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. In the silence of my car, the rain now louder, I gripped the steering wheel and waited. Not for tears. Those didn't come. What came was something quieter, heavier, not grief, not rage, just clarity. They thought they were done with me. But what they didn't know, what no one had noticed, was that in my silence, I'd been watching, logging, archiving, every overlooked inconsistency, every system they'd bypassed for the sake of quarterly velocity. Every decision that looked just a little too clean on paper. I hadn't planned on using any of it. Not until they gave me reason. They laughed when they fired me. 3 days later, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. They called me legacy. Not to my face, of course. That would have taken spine. No, it was the way they said it in budget meetings. Legacy systems, legacy code, legacy roles. The polite corporate way of saying outdated, slow, unnecessary. A word that once meant something noble, now used to mark things for demolition. I was legacy. I didn't even realize how long I'd been receding until I started looking back. Not from anger, but from curiosity. Like reading your own obituary in real time. At some point, my direct reports were reassigned temporarily. Projects I initiated were migrated to new teams. The new CTO, Julian, had a fondness for younger hires with polished sneakers and PowerPoint decks filled with gradient backgrounds and vague metrics. Every meeting began with a quote from a startup guru. "If you're not breaking things," he liked to say, "you're not innovating." I remember sitting there once as he said that, watching the intern next to me nod like he'd heard the voice of God. They didn't know the systems they were breaking had safety checks built in, that I'd put them there, not for show, but to protect the company from itself. They didn't know I had eyes in places they'd forgotten existed. The irony was, in pushing me out, they assumed I'd take my knowledge with me quietly. That, I'd vanish like a retired librarian. But here's the thing about being legacy. You're everywhere. I had designed too much of the backbone. My fingerprints were on hundreds of scripts, stored procedures, archive logs, systems so old they'd stopped being reviewed. But they still ran, humming in the background, silent and powerful. And some of them were watching. Not in a sci-fi way. Just in the way that real engineers build. Verbose logs, quiet alerts, buried tracebacks nobody ever cleans up because it's not a priority right now. No one had ever noticed the redundancy in the audit trail logs, the one I had insisted on keeping just in case. I kept a separate off-site mirror for my own reference, encrypted and untouched. Not out of paranoia, out of principle. It took only one long night to see what I needed to see. After I got home from being fired, I sat in the quiet of my living room, lights off, laptop glowing faint blue against the dark. I poured myself a glass of Glenlivet, the kind I used to save for work anniversaries, and logged into the private node I'd built years ago. A diagnostic sandbox, technically unauthorized, but not malicious. Just mine. A place to test, code, and store backups. I started tracing. It began with a payment discrepancy I'd noticed months ago. A small vendor payout that didn't match the procurement chain. At the time, I'd flagged it in a private note, expecting to circle back. I never did. But now I had nothing but time. And what I found, buried in lines of redundant metadata, was a pattern. Dummy contracts, circular invoices, shadow vendor profiles, with just enough legitimacy to pass a surface audit. I leaned back, heartbeat steady, mind sharper than it had been in years. Because I knew whose hands were on this. Julian's name appeared in the metadata once. Too obvious. Sloppy even. But more interesting were the chains that led back to Evan, the CFO, and Lena, head of procurement. Cross-referencing system permissions, I tracked the access logs. They'd been sanitizing transaction trails, then using isolated cloud billing shells to obfuscate destination accounts. It was amateur fraud, dressed up in cloud-native terminology, and it had gone undetected for almost 14 months. They thought they were clever, but they'd forgotten who built the trail they were trying to erase. By sunrise, I had built a digital case, not speculation, not theory. Hard logs, timestamps, credential mismatches, financial inconsistencies triangulated from multiple mirrors. I didn't rush. This wasn't for revenge. It was for the truth. I created a physical file, printed, annotated, bound. A digital copy, too, with a checksum signature. Then I waited. Waited for the Monday morning I knew would come, when the audit team would receive an anonymous tip with a full report. When the forensic accountant I once mentored, now working with a federal contract agency, would quietly request a background check on 3 executives and flag a red alert marker on their cloud transaction history. When the floor would crack open under them, 1 quiet inch at a time, They never even saw me leave, but I was still there. A ghost in the system. Monday began like every other Monday at Norex. Too many Slack pings, too much coffee, too little attention. They didn't notice the tremor right away. These things don't happen like movies. No gasps, no sudden crashes of glass. It starts with a request, a call from compliance, a ping from legal, the kind that hits a C-suite inbox and makes a throat go dry. At 9:41 a.m., Evan's assistant forwarded him an email marked, "Confidential inquiry. Immediate response requested." By 10:03, Lena had canceled her weekly procurement stand-up. Julian, always performative, made a loud joke about Big Brother watching as he passed the open bullpen. But I know he didn't laugh once after stepping into his office. The audit report I'd compiled was precise. Each page cross-referenced. Every anomaly matched to its access log, its false invoice, its paper trail. I'd made sure not to accuse, just to illuminate. When you shine a light bright enough, the shadows do the rest of the talking. I wasn't there to see it, but I could feel it. The vibration of panic carries through systems. Missed calls, sudden calendar blocks, private meeting rooms being reserved in quick succession. I kept my eyes on their public signals. Julian's LinkedIn went private that afternoon. Lena stopped tweeting. The storm had begun, and it was internal. Perfect. By Tuesday, the office tension had crystallized. Not a single announcement had been made, but everyone could feel it. Developers started whispering in break rooms. HR began moving with nervous urgency. You don't need words when people begin avoiding eye contact and holding their breath in hallways. Then came Wednesday. The third day, it was raining again. Hard this time. Cold. The kind of rain that bites into your skin. At exactly 2:12 p.m., 2 federal agents arrived at the Norex headquarters. No sirens, no chaos, just calm authority. They didn't even speak as they entered. Just presented their credentials to the receptionist, who stared at the badges like they were written in another language. One of them had a leather folio. Inside, my report, now carrying an official seal. That's how I knew the ball had moved, not just internally but up the chain. There had been enough substance in what I found to trigger a formal review. Julian was the first to be taken aside. Not handcuffed. Not yet. But when you're asked to voluntarily surrender your laptop and your phone, you understand what's at stake. His posture, I was told later, had changed. Gone was the forward-leaning, chest-out disruptor. What remained was a man trying not to unravel in front of junior staff. By 4 p.m., legal had initiated a full freeze on 3 accounts. Procurement went dark. A senior member of the board flew in from New York. Employees were instructed to work from home until further notice, and that was when my phone rang. Not my cell, not even my home number. It was the landline in my study, the one only a handful of people had. I let it ring twice before answering. It was Sharon from payroll. Her voice cracked almost immediately. "Daniel," she said, "I don't know what's going on, but it's bad. They're saying Julian's being investigated. Evan, too. Everyone's looking for the original access logs. Your name came up." I didn't say anything. "Did you?" She trailed off, not finishing the question. There was a long pause. She didn't press. Just let the silence speak. "I just kept receipts," I said finally. "Someone had to." She whispered something. Maybe, "Thank you." Maybe, "God, help us." And then hung up. That night, I sat in the dark again, but the silence was different. Not heavy, not sad, just still. I had no joy in it. I didn't want to see anyone fall, but I knew they had to. Not for me. For the people who were still there, the engineers, the assistants, the interns nodding in meetings, believing in something. The company had called me legacy, but they'd forgotten. Legacies aren't just abandoned, they're remembered. The official statement came Thursday morning. A single email. No greeting, no warmth, just black text on white. "We are conducting a routine internal audit in coordination with federal agencies to ensure transparency and compliance. Business operations continue as usual. Please direct any inquiries to legal or HR." That last line, business operations continue as usual, was the biggest lie they told that week, because nothing was usual anymore. The Slack channels had turned quiet, like someone had drained the oxygen out of them. Conversations that once buzzed with memes and emojis now read like ghost towns. Even the sales team, normally oblivious to technical tremors, started asking questions. But what caught my attention wasn't the panic, it was the absence. Julian didn't show up that day. Neither did Lena. No announcement, no farewell post. They were just gone. Scrubbed even. Their internal profiles deactivated. Calendar events vanished midstream. The kind of quiet you hear right before a building implodes. I watched it all from a distance. No longer part of the org chart, but still somehow more connected than most. Funny, isn't it? When I was inside, I was invisible. Now that I was gone, they couldn't stop saying my name. I started getting messages, private ones. Some cautiously grateful, others cautiously curious. Most were from people I'd trained years ago, now managers, themselves, caught between allegiance and survival. And then came the call from the board. It was brief. A man named Garrett, senior partner from a VC firm I'd never spoken to directly. His voice was too smooth, practiced. "Daniel," he began, "I want you to know that the board takes these allegations very seriously. We're grateful for your historical stewardship of the company's systems. There may be an opportunity for us to bring you in, discreetly, to help stabilize things during this transition." I let him speak. I wanted to hear the shape of his fear. We'd of course compensate you generously. Consultant status, autonomy, you wouldn't be reporting to anyone involved in the current investigation. I waited. He went quiet. Expecting, I think, a flood of eagerness, gratitude. The triumphant return of the castaway. Instead, I asked, "Why now?" A pause. I heard the hum of an expensive air purifier in the background. "We believe the company needs people who understand its roots." Roots. That word stayed with me. They had spent the last 3 years hacking at those very roots, cutting out everyone who remembered how it all began, who built things slowly, deliberately, with care. And now, with the ground giving way, they wanted the roots back. "Let me think on it," I said, even though I didn't need to. "I'll call you tomorrow." That night, I didn't open the laptop. Didn't scroll or refresh or pull up dashboards. I just sat on the floor of my study, watching the old circuit board sculpture my son made me when he was 12. He called it the core. Said it reminded him of how I always explained servers, not as machines, but as beating hearts keeping. Everything alive. I ran my fingers across the rusted solder. It still worked. That's what they never understood. There are systems you can't reboot once you've gutted them, and there are people you can't discard without consequence. The next morning, I sat down to write my answer to the board. But before I hit send, something else came in, an offer from someone else, someone watching from afar. And it wasn't just a job, it was an invitation. It came from a startup I'd barely heard of. Small, private, quiet. Their message wasn't polished, no recruiter jargon, no PDF with glossy graphs. Just a plain text email from a woman named Mira, Kim, co-founder and head of engineering at a firm called Orin Systems. The subject line simply read, I read between the lines. Inside it said, "Daniel, you don't know me, but I know your work. Not just what you built, but how. I've followed the Norex situation. You kept the house standing long after they stopped checking the foundation. That kind of thinking, that kind of restraint is rare. We're building something. Not fast, not flashy, but real. And we need someone who understands structure. I don't want to poach you. I want to build with you. Would you talk?" I must have reread it 10 times. Each word settled deep in my chest like clean air after months of breathing smoke. She didn't offer me a title. She offered me a place. There's a difference. By noon, 3 more messages followed. Not from Mira, but from others I'd worked with years ago. People who'd quietly left Norex when the culture started curdling. Some were with her now. Engineers, designers. Even the old sysadmin, Paul, who once built our first network on an actual shoestring budget and still ran circles around kids, half his age. One of them wrote, "I remember when you stayed late to fix that rollback script no one else would touch. You didn't say anything. You just fixed it. That's why I left when you left." That one hit me harder than I expected. All those late nights, all that silence. I'd assumed it meant I didn't matter. But silence leaves echoes. I took the call with Mira that evening. She didn't talk like an executive. She spoke like someone who still wrote code at 2 a.m. because she believed in what she was building. She asked thoughtful questions. She listened more than she pitched. But what struck me most? She never once mentioned stock options or scaling fast. She talked about integrity, about legacy, not as a thing to be discarded, but as a foundation to build from. "We don't want to move fast and break things," she said. "We want to move carefully and last." That word again. Last. It felt like someone had reached back and touched the person I was 15 years ago, when I joined Norex before it. Even had a name, just an idea scribbled on a napkin. After the call, I sat on my porch and watched the rain ease into mist. I thought about the offer from the board. The one that came too late. The one that wasn't really an invitation, just a grasp for control. And then I thought about Mira. About what it means to start again. Not out of spite, but out of purpose. Slept well that night, and in the morning I wrote 2 letters. One to Mira, the other to the board. The letter I wrote to the board wasn't angry. It wasn't long either. 3 paragraphs, tidy, controlled, just like I'd always been. I thanked them for the opportunity, past and present. Acknowledged the shared years, the growth, the scars. I offered no blame, no recitation of offenses, no need, they already knew. But in the final lines, I was clear. I won't be returning in any capacity. My time with Norex taught me the value of precision, of systems that run not on flash but on structure. That value was compromised when noise was mistaken for innovation and experience for inertia. I wish you clarity in the rebuilding, but I won't be part of it. I sent it without rereading. Then I turned to Mira's message and hit reply. By the end of the week, I was in a new space. Not a corner office, not even an office at all. A repurposed shipping container turned into a makeshift lab. 1 long table. Coffee rings on recycled plywood. Whiteboards that had real ideas scrawled across them. Half-formed, unpolished, alive. The air smelled like solder and eucalyptus. It reminded me of the early Norex days. Before the suits, before the culture team, before the boardroom. Had its own minibar. People built things here. They argued about code, not clout. Mira gave me no title. Just a seat, a set of credentials, and access to a server stack still being wired in. "We're not building a unicorn," she said, leaning against the wall beside me, barefoot, still debugging something on her screen. "We're building something that matters. Something that'll outlive all of us. If we do it right." She didn't smile as she said it. She just meant it. And I realized that's what I'd been missing all along. Not power. Not revenge. Just meaning. Back at Norex, the collapse was slow, but it came. The investigation widened. Public filings revealed inflated vendor contracts, conflict of interest breaches, and a massive shortfall in reported operational margins. Julian resigned to spend more time with his family. Lena's consultancy evaporated overnight. Evan denied everything, of course, but the CFO flipped, and the press loves a trail of receipts. By month's end, the name Norex no longer carried weight. It carried warning. And then, the final call. A voicemail. I let it go to recording. I knew the number. It was Sharon from payroll. Her voice was quiet. Hurt. "They want you back," she said, no preamble. "Garrett says they'll make you CTO. Full autonomy. Rewrite the charter. Erase the last 2 years like they never happened." She waited, as if expecting me to pick up mid-voicemail. Then softer. "Daniel, he said they'd double the offer. They're scared. Really scared. And honestly, they should be." Click. I stared at the wall for a while after that. Then I walked to the new whiteboard, picked up a marker, and under the heading Core Values, I wrote, "Dignity isn't negotiable." I never called them back. Not because I wanted to prove something, not because I hated them, because I was done. There's a moment, subtle, internal, when you realize you no longer belong to the place that broke you. Not because it threw you out, but because something inside you outgrew its walls. That's what Norex became. A wall that collapsed under its own weight. I just happened to be standing outside when it did. We launched our prototype 6 months later. No press release, no staged photos, just a code push, a ripple across a network of organizations who still believed in systems built for resilience, not just revenue. What we built wasn't sexy, it didn't trend, but it worked. Quietly, dependably, like a heartbeat. And in time, people noticed. Not investors looking for fast exits, not influencers chasing buzzwords, but founders, architects, real builders. The kind who wipe their hands on their jeans after debugging a network that's been alive longer than most tech bros have had Wi-Fi. They started reaching out. They remembered me. Not because I was flashy, but because when things went wrong, I fixed them. And I did it without needing credit. That's the part that stays with me. Not the fall. Not the fallout. But the realization that worth doesn't vanish just because someone stops seeing it. It waits, silent, steady, until the noise dies down, and then it steps forward again, ready to build. One morning, months into our second major deployment, I got an email from a junior dev I'd mentored years ago. He'd landed a lead role in a nonprofit data integrity project and wanted to know if I'd review his architecture draft. He ended the message with, "I remember what you said once. Do the work like someone you love will inherit it. I never forgot that. Just thought you should know." I sat there a while, reading that line again and again. Then I stood, walked to the whiteboard, and added it beneath the values we'd been collecting over months. It was value number 12. And then, for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not out of pride, not out of victory, but because I finally understood something. Some endings don't require applause, they just need closure. And some legacies don't need to be loud to last. If this story moved you, tap the video on screen to hear more stories like this. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated? Subscribe for more real, raw narratives where silence becomes strength, and justice doesn't need a spotlight.